But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Fireside Chat. Today's guest is the Executive Director for the Canadian Centre for Men and Families. Welcome to the show, Justin Trottier. Am I getting that right? Justin Trottier?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Yep. About as close as anybody ever gets.
All right, all right. How do you say it?
The only accurate pronunciation is in French, I suppose. It would be Trottier. So
okay, I got close. Today, we're going to be spreading awareness and discussing a new initiative to fund the construction of Toronto's first shelter for male victims of domestic violence. So, Justin, how did you manage to get this going? Like, what was the, what did you spot the need, decide you're going to take this challenge on, and was this a big challenge?
We've recognized the need ever since we opened the doors of the Canadian Centre for Men and Families here in Toronto, because we routinely, and by routinely I mean once on average every other day, get a call from a man, often a father, who is calling us in desperation because he has been subjected to emotional, verbal, physical, sometimes even sexual abuse by a partner. And he doesn't know where to go. And maybe he's had a negative experience with law enforcement where they don't believe him. Maybe they've even thrown him out of his house, making him homeless, perhaps leaving his children with an abusive parent. And so he calls us kind of as a last resort. And we do what we can for him. We do a number of services here at the center for male abuse victims. But we don't operate a shelter. And a lot of men call us hoping we do because they don't know where else to go. And yeah, over the last few years, enough of these stories have piled up that we started to have conversations with government agencies and also with some of the members of our philanthropic community. So the very generous donors who have been supporting us over the years. And over the summer, a few of these donors stepped up and said, you know what, the time has come. We were going to make a substantial contribution, build the foundation so that maybe others would put forward their financial support. And that's really what allowed us to initiate the fundraising campaign that is now nearing its completion. And I think if we continue with the momentum we've had over the last couple of months, we should be able to complete this by the end of the year.
All right. That's exciting stuff. I'm getting someone in the chat is saying that there's an echo. You're not hearing an echo, are you, Justin, from me? Am I echoing for you at all?
No.
No. Okay. I just want to make sure the sound is okay, guys. If you're watching, let me know if you're hearing echo or if it's just Christopher Mann. Also, if you just as a reminder, a couple things. One, if you're running into issues with the stream here, be sure to go to Twitch because it tends to be more stable there. And I am watching Twitch, so if you're wondering, will I be heard if I make a comment? I will see it because I'm looking at the Twitch stream as well. Secondly, if you have any questions for Justin, just put them in there and I will pass them along if I think that they're really good. And then lastly, if you want to be able to see all the content that we make on all the channels, go to badgerfeed.com. It's where basically all of the content ends up, and it is a nice place where you can go to see everything. This is something we're putting in place in case YouTube decides to drop the axe on our channel, as a lot of channels seem to, sort of, they're getting pushed out, or at least that's how it appears. So we're just covering ourselves. All right. I just had to get all that stuff out of the way. But so right now, I'm going to display where we are on this fundraiser. I'm currently looking at the GoFundMe page, and let me put it up. This shows that you guys are currently at $25,995 out of a $50,000 goal. But to be clear, there's actually, you have raised $175,000 Is that because I want to make sure I got this right? So
yeah, so let me give you the complete picture, because it's really, really important to appreciate where we're at and how we got here. I was just describing how a small group of philanthropists provided some seed funding. That seed funding ended up being $100,000, and that came in the summer. And then we did some fundraising through some channels that we have access to. There's a number of foundations that have been supporting us over the years, some community development funds. And so we were able to get to $150,000 through all of those channels. And that's when we launched the crowdfunding campaign. So the crowdfunding campaign on GoFundMe, GoFundMe.com/Abused Men's Shelter is the link for those who want to get all the details and stay up to date on things. That's to bring in another $100,000, which would finish the campaign. That's our ultimate goal, is to raise $250,000. That's what we need to open an actual space, an actual facility that would provide shelter to a number of families. And the great thing right now is that any funds that come in through the GoFundMe platform up until the end of the year will be matched and therefore doubled by one of our backers. So if you do the math, that's what gets you to that $250,000 by the end of the year. Because we're working very hard to, take advantage of a number of different funding avenues that have been made available to us.
I see. And when's so this money's just to get the facility built. So would that mean that your staff, would that be, would they be salaried employees, or would they be more like volunteers? I'm wondering how that would work. Yeah,
the funding is for capital expenses and for the first 2 years of operations. We understand that to keep the place going long term, we're going to need to bring in partnerships from government and other foundations. And the whole idea here, we've had a series of meetings with government agencies, including both the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario. And the reason we've met with both levels of government is they're both involved in supporting shelters in Toronto. The city provides support to homeless shelters, most homeless shelters, and the province supports specifically the violence against women shelters. So we want to set this up as the first violence against men shelter for male victims of domestic violence. Therefore, we want to be able to count on support from both the city and the province. Now, both of them have made it clear that they do support this in principle, but they're watching. They're seeing if there is enough private capital to get behind this before they would throw in their funding. So if we can demonstrate proof of concept, this is something that nobody has been able to do up until now. They've kind of just gone to government and said, you should really build this for us. And the government's turned them down for a variety of reasons. We're going to show them that there is private support, both from individuals and corporations. And then we're going to go back to government and ask them to follow through on that pledge, which is to kick in the funding to make this a long-term sustainable project. Right. So that's an important element of it, but we're quite confident that they will come through if they see that there is a partnership in place where it's not only the government we're counting on, but all these other forms of contribution.
Okay. And I did put a link to the GoFundMe in the low bar. It was there before we started. So if you guys want to donate, I think this is very important stuff. So whatever you can give, no matter how small, because this isn't just going to, I was just talking to Justin before we started the call, before we started the show. And, we don't really have anything like this in the U.S. And I guess as far as major metropolitan areas, this is a first in Canada as well. Am I correct? If this was to go through?
Yeah, so exactly. When we put the proposal together, and anybody who's really interested can see our lengthy sort of case for support, where we really do survey the North American scene, looking at any precedents with respect to services and especially shelters for male victims of domestic violence, because we want to learn from what's been done before. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use the best practices in this area. Unfortunately, there's not a lot to draw from, but there are a few instances, mostly in rural communities and small cities, where there are some small shelters that have opened up for men and families. But what we've discovered quite counterintuitively, is that among metropolitan cities, so these are larger cities of 1 million people or more, there isn't one shelter for male victims of domestic violence, and certainly not for men and children, a family shelter. Nothing for the bigger cities, which is paradoxical, but it's the way things are. So this really would be the first of its kind. And again, we don't want to be the only one. We want to help other people to set up similar spaces. And we hope that what we do can be as I said, a proof of concept, not only for government and other funders, but also for other agencies who might be thinking about following in our footsteps.
Right. And again, if you do this and it works and it's a successful model, then people in the States, in Europe, and other countries can look to that as an example of, at least a place to start from if they want to fund their own men's shelter. So, and not, well, men and families. There was something kind of interesting in the in some of the literature I was looking at and some of the emails that were being passed around that I thought was, it stood out, it jumped out at me, and it said, single father families are the fastest growing family form in Canada. Are you aware of this? I assume you are, because, it's part of this. So, that's kind of interesting to me. So can you expand a little bit on that?
So that's true about Canada. It may be true in other countries as well. I wouldn't be surprised. But the Canadian data is very clear that, just as you said, single father families are the fastest growing family form. So just to clarify, that doesn't mean that there are more single father families than other kinds of families. Of course, it just means that it's growing. Like that's where it's trending, and that's where things are going to be in the future. And so that's why we're wondering why there are. This is true in Ontario, it may be true in other places too, affordable housing projects that are specifically made for mothers and children. Single mother families have access to affordable housing and shelters and other housing projects that are not available to families that have that are father-led households, single father families. It's baffling to me. If we want to encourage more men to become engaged fathers, why we don't provide them with the kind of resources and support that they need to do that. And so what we're doing is part of that. It's providing temporary housing, at least, to single fathers or to fathers who are having to find a safe haven for them and their children as a result of fleeing domestic abuse. And many of the men that call us in this situation are fathers who are needing not only to escape for their own well-being, but also because their children may be abused or may be at risk of becoming abused. And those fathers, when they call the police, when they contact victim service agencies, they're not getting the support that they need. And that's why a lot of them do turn to us. Right. And in a lot of cases, like this lack of shelters for men, where there are shelters, they usually, the way that the men are treated in other shelters is nothing like the kinds of services you guys want to provide, right? Like, other than those small ones we talked about. For example, here in Chicago, this is, probably the second or third largest city in the United States. There are no shelters for men, and the ones that exist for women, whether they are government shelters or charity-oriented, like the ones that sort of exist within churches and stuff, when there are male victims or men looking for shelter, they're usually either sent to the same kind of shelters that homeless go to, or they're put in more of a rehabilitation type situation where it's more about trying to get them essentially to be less violent or to avoid, domestic violence situations as though they are to blame. It's sort of like, using the Duluth model, as it were. So, right. To get them the services they really need, the kind of help they need, and also for their kids who, in these sort of domestic violence situations, the children are often the largest victims, and they're usually caught in between, and and all that. So sometimes the father has his kids and he wants to protect them from a violent wife and mother, and he doesn't have a lot of recourse. So this is why this is so important. Exactly. Yeah. Shelter can be, often are, a very traumatizing place to live. And to be fair, that's true for any population of people living in a shelter, but in particular, somebody who's just been through a traumatic experience or maybe has lived with abuse and violence for a number of years. You don't want to put these people in a place where they may be re-victimized or further traumatized. That's why it's important that we treat male victims of domestic violence just the same way we treat female victims. There's a reason why we have a separate facility for women who have just left a violent, abusive home. We should do the same thing for men. And right now we don't. If anything, we would provide them with the same access to a shelter that the general homeless population would have access to, and they won't get trauma counseling. They won't get family law services. They won't get the kind of intimate connections that a violence against women shelter has with Children's Aid Society, with family courts. So when a woman leaves an abusive husband, she doesn't just need shelter. She needs all sorts of other support for her and her family. And she gets that right now through a violence against women shelter. And I'm glad that those exist. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge, especially because of the trend in terms of single father households being the fastest growing family form, as we described, that dads do need the same kind of, not just safe space, but also the sort of services to heal from the trauma that they would have just gone through.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I also noticed that you have opened a sister office in Ottawa for the Canadian Centre for Men and Families. Congratulations on that too, right? That was just this fall, from what I read.
Yes, it's been a busy fall for us, I suppose. This has all happened just in the last few months. In September, we opened the doors at the Canadian Centre for Men and Families in Ottawa, which is a big deal for a few reasons. It's the first time in Canada that an agency has operated multiple spaces, multiple men's centers, centers for and fathering programs and all the other things that we do. But also it's a space in Ottawa. And so that being the capital of the country, we have every intention not only of offering services to men and families in the Ottawa community, which is critical, but also getting more involved in policy debates and in advocacy to make sure that policies are inclusive of the perspectives and the issues that do disproportionately affect boys, men, and fathers.
And you know what? While I'm thinking about it. What kind of services do you guys offer at both the Canadian Centre for Men and Families and this shelter that you're trying to fund?
Well, the shelter, we would continue to operate the same services. We'd probably actually increase the services and emphasize more the trauma programs that we already do run. But we would do that within a common facility so that men and children who are accessing the shelter in the same location would be able to take advantage of a number of programs. So let me describe what those are.
Sure.
We run a support group. It's the only support group in Toronto for male victims of domestic violence. We also couple that with individual trauma counseling, with access to legal aid for men who've experienced domestic abuse. And then if men are also fathers, we offer a fathering program called Fathering After Separation or Divorce. And of course, a lot of men who are leaving an abusive home, well, it's likely that their relationship is also ending. And so they very well may need not only access to family law services, so that they can hopefully fight to remain, as involved as possible in the life of their children, but also they might need a number of other services that touch on family courts and their role as fathers, including fathers in a family breakup situation. So we offer a package of services that would be appropriate to that population.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great. Do you have now? Okay, so we're pretty close. Are you pretty confident that you're going to hit your goal?
I think the momentum is there, but I do want to encourage anybody listening to take advantage of that donor matching opportunity. It's only for the next 5.5, 6 weeks until the end of the year that any dollar that comes in is being doubled. That's a pretty good kind of leverage. So if you're making, we tell people who can't make giant donations, donate when there's a match, because then if you donate $100, that's now $200.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage people, don't just assume we're going to get there. There's still a significant gap that has to be closed. We have a small opportunity to close it through the matching offer. So please go to GoFundMe.com/abused men shelter. Be a part of this historic initiative. When we look back at this in years from now, and hopefully Toronto gets the first shelter for male abuse victims, and it may prove to be the catalyst for any number of similar spaces all across the US and Canada, don't you want to be part of that initiative? So please donate whatever you can now at that GoFundMe platform. We really appreciate it.
Yes, please do. And when does the GoFundMe expire? Is there a time limit on this, or
the match will end at the end of the year, and hopefully that will be what we need to close the campaign. If it's not, we will have to keep fundraising into the new year, and also our ability to offer the kinds of services men in this situation really need may be compromised if we don't succeed in getting the full amount. So, there will be negative consequences if we don't get to where we want to go. On the flip side, if we surpass our goal, we can offer more services. We can take on even a bigger space, which means more families will get support. There's no way, whatever funds we raise, that we can help everybody, because the gap is just so large in terms of the need and what we can provide. But the more resources we get, the more we can do. So I hope that encourages people to give generously to this really unique project.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I thought I would ask you this. So one thing that often our donors, and many do respond to, are personal stories. So of the people that you have helped, either through the Canadian Centre for Men and Families or other areas, is there any stories of male victims of domestic violence or separation of parents and their children, or anything like that you could share with us? Anything that sort of stands out in your mind?
Well, tragically, there's all too many stories that I could share. There's actually a couple that we posted to the GoFundMe page. Actually, we posted one, but we will post a couple more. And then if you go to our website, to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Equality Canada TV, there's at least 4 or 5 men, very brave men, who have talked about their experiences. And I can maybe just refer to the one that we do have on the GoFundMe page, because we put that one up first because it kind of hits on a number of themes that a lot of these stories do often incorporate. So here we have a man, and I can use his name because he's consented to that, and his name is Steve. Mm-hmm. And so Steve had been a victim of verbal and physical abuse for many years, for I think at least 6 years before he actually notified authorities. And to this day, the police, though notified on several occasions, have never supported him in any meaningful way, never mind, pressing charges against his ex-partner for what she put him through. But he was attacked with a big pen. He was basically, stabbed with a pen. Oh. He was punched. He was physically assaulted. I think the most sort of gruesome incident was when his partner, then his wife, called him to apologize and to talk to him. And he ended up in the car with her, which was a mistake. And because as soon as he got in the car, she took the opportunity to blast him as being responsible for all of their marriage troubles. He tried to get out of the car, and she pulled away and ended up dragging him and rolling him along the road. Now, not all the incidents are that graphic, but some of them are. Yeah. And even with that having happened, this was not taken seriously by the police. I think they just basically didn't believe him when he reported it. Now, what's even more tragic is that Steve has a son. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think Steve has a couple of children. And when he left, when he was forced to leave because the police essentially evicted him from his own house, what happened after that, and what women who experience domestic abuse don't often also have to deal with, is that he was denied access to his kids when his relationship broke down, when he ended up divorcing his wife. And he's not seen his kids since that moment a number of years ago. And in fact, his kids have now had their minds poisoned against him. And so now, on top of everything else, he also has to deal with parental alienation. Mm-hmm. And his kids actually take to text and send him messages, essentially bullying him for coming out and talking about his experiences as a male victim of domestic violence. So it's just one thing after another that's compounded his horror story, which he lives up to, which he lives with, up to the present time. Uh-huh. And so his story is particularly tragic. But many of the stories have similar themes: the police not doing their job, the social service agencies not being available, shelters really dismissing men when they call looking for a place for domestic abuse, where they can not only find shelter, but also find those services that we were talking about. And then also if they're dads, this issue where if you choose to leave, you just decide you've had enough. You just can't continue subjecting yourself to this abuse. You know, you're in a catch-22 if you've got kids. You take them with you, and if so, where do you go? Or do you leave them with a potentially abusive and violent mother? It's a horrible situation that these dads have to go through. And I'm just hoping that if we can get this facility open, that at least a small number of them can make use of this safe space, not only for them, but for their families.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great story. I'm really sorry. I hope that the guy gets all the help that he needs. I do have some great questions from the chat, though. So Lise Maxwell says, how effective do you think you are in the case of favorable results? Again, I'm assuming he's referring to your, helping men.
Favorable results, what, in family court?
Yeah, I guess so. Or also just providing services to men with DV, that are involved in domestic violence issues and stuff like that.
Well, we do evaluate all of our programs, and the evaluation, we have both the testimonials, which are kind of anecdotal, which we've put up on our website and on the YouTube channel I mentioned, and then we've got more objective metrics that I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested. But I think they do prove the case that the center has been a real catalyst in terms of helping men. Men describe it as changing their life. They describe it as, in some cases, saving their life. I mean, those are their words. So I think that the last 3 years have sort of borne out the theory that we went into the center with, which is that having a safe space that's actually geared for men, where men know that they're welcome and they won't be dismissed because of their gender, it really does make a difference. We know a number of guys that have come to us because they had such a negative experience, not only with police, but with victim service agencies, family service agencies, all the kinds of institutions that are supposed to be there to help men, whether it's with abuse or other mental health issues that they're going through. And really, they were failed. And then they came to us and they described that experience has been life-changing. So again, those are kind of anecdotes that I can point to, but if you want to look at the objective metrics that we use to sort of support our fundraising applications, then I'm happy to share those links or those reports. Okay.
Well, yeah, there you have it. I mean, you guys can go to, I'll include the link to the actual menandfamilies.org website as well, so you guys can take a look at that. I got another really good question from here. Someone said, in your research for how to build the structure of your shelter, this is Power Player 1000, did you come across anything you saw that the women's shelters were not doing that you planned on doing with the men's shelter?
Yeah, so one thing is the women's shelters tend to have policies that, essentially many of them do, prohibit men over a certain age, usually 14 or 16, from stepping foot on the premises. It's a really segregated space, and I understand why a lot of them choose to do that. I'm not sure if they necessarily need to do that, but there are reasons why they think that's important. We're not sure that that's the model we want to use. And so, for example, if a family comes to us and it includes a father and, let's say, a daughter, and the daughter is over 14, maybe even over 18, but is still living with the dad, I'm not sure we're going to say that family can't stay with us, or that female can't stay with us. We're exploring that, but I don't think we're going to take as segregated an approach as a lot of the violence against women shelters do. So again, I'm not passing judgment on the shelters that choose to use that approach, but I think from our research, we don't believe that that's necessary. In fact, we think involving more people in the healing process is important. And that's what we do with the Center for Men and Families, is we often do involve not only the man who's the client, but also perhaps that individual's children or parents or friends, and those may be both male or female people.
Right. Okay. Another question. This one's from me. So one of the things that I find is a challenge when you're trying to help men is that a lot of times men don't seek help. Do you, and maybe this is not even something that can be measured, but do you think that is, do you run into that challenge at all of men that maybe they don't think they need it as much, or, you know, they don't come to you when they probably should? And how can we maybe get more men to recognize their own, you know, vulnerabilities so that they can seek out assistance when they need it? This is a bit of a meta question, but
it's a really good question. And it's one of the reasons why we do involve the entire family in the healing process, or even friends of the client, because very often we'll actually get contacted not by the client himself, but maybe by a friend or a family member, a loved one of that individual. And very often it's a woman actually who calls us. And so by being very receptive to whoever walks in the door or calls us on the phone, we can reach those men more effectively. So that's one strategy. I think that's worked quite well. But the other thing is the branding. It's really important. I mean, a lot of agencies, I think, shoot themselves in the foot because the messaging that they use, whether it's in the visuals or in the language, really screams this is for women only. And there are some small tweaks that I've even advised agencies, sometimes by invitation, sometimes unsolicited advice from me, that they could do to encourage more men to come forward and get help. And so I can't tell you how many men call us saying, I'm so glad there's a center for men and families, because now I know that I'll be given, you know, a fair hearing, or that there's a space where I'm welcome. I think that's been a big boost.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad those are some great ideas. I got another one here. This is from Alan Hardman. He says, with the problems of getting a shelter for men and boys seen in the past with the advent of social media, is there a more relaxed feeling towards moving forwards compared to the past? I don't know if that question makes a lot of sense to you.
So I maybe I'm reading into it a bit, but is perhaps that individual sensing maybe some urgency on our part to kind of get this open, and will that urgency relax?
Oh yeah, maybe.
So I think the answer is that if we get the center open, or the shelter open, I think it's going to be a real catalyst. As I mentioned earlier, I really think other agencies are watching what we're doing. In fact, I know that they are. We just had a conference a couple weeks back, and this was a bit of a watershed in its own right. It's a conference we do every year called Healing Journeys, and it's connected because it focuses on male victims of trauma, domestic abuse, but also sexual abuse, and other emotional abuse, all forms of trauma. And this year we had the police out for the first time as a speaker on a panel. We had some very prominent agencies ranging from the Toronto Distress Center to a number of hospitals and other mental health agencies, family services, victim services, that were all represented either in the audience or on panels. And we had a really amazing attendance and a great conversation. And one thing we did was we talked about the shelter project. We even played some videos that we've got up on our GoFundMe website, gofundme.com/abusedmanshelter. And a lot of people came up to us later and said, we really want this to succeed. We will do what we can to make it succeed. We know, because we've got men, these are frontline agencies after all, we have men contacting us who need this space desperately. So if you can make this happen, we will help you keep it open. And we will, you know, maybe I'm reading a bit between the lines here, but we want to become partners with you. We want to kind of bring this to other communities across Canada. A lot of the agencies that came to this conference were from outside Toronto. So yes, I think the foundation is there, that we can see this become a turning point, that if we get the shelter open and it's successful, that it really would encourage other agencies to emulate it, because a lot of these agencies are already following along and very excited by what they're seeing. Right. So I don't know if that will relax the urgency. I think there's always going to be more we need to do than we can do with the resources we've got. So I'm always going to be really, you know, passionate and excited about building the resources and raising awareness with more men and families. But yeah, I think what we're doing here is something special, and I think it's going to have some really far-reaching consequences.
Okay. Alan Hardman messaged me again. He wanted to clarify. He says, I'm saying that there have been issues with funding and problems with support for ideas like a men's shelter in the past. And I think he's referring to Earl Silverman, who, you know, ran into lots and lots of blowback trying to open up a men's shelter and ended up committing suicide because he had so much difficulty doing it. But I think that your guys' approach appears to be have been largely immune to pushback, I'm guessing.
So I'm glad somebody mentioned Earl, because he was really one of the major inspirations for the Center for Men and Families getting off the ground and then carrying us through to the shelter campaign. And I'm looking actually at a picture of him we have up on the wall here at the Toronto office. But I think things have changed, and Earl deserves a lot of credit for helping with that. I think we're in a position now where we've got more of an opportunity. I think just in terms of the feedback we've been getting, I mentioned the conference we just had and all these various agencies that were part of that and that wished us very well and have really followed through on their pledges to support us. And I think that's new. I don't think that we've really seen that level of support over the last few years. And then to circle back to something I said earlier, we've had meetings, as I mentioned earlier, with both the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario. And with the Province of Ontario, we met with the senior the senior managers of the violence against women shelters in Toronto. So, I mean, these are the people that really, need to be convinced that men are victims of domestic abuse. And if they are so convinced, they're very influential people that could make funding happen in terms of sustaining and even growing a shelter in Toronto for abused men. And they really are supportive. Like I said earlier, I don't want to oversell this. They're not funding it just yet, but they have done other things. They have connected us and set up meetings with executive directors of violence against women shelters so that we could really understand how violence against women or potentially a violence against men shelter, how it would operate, because it's not simple to run a shelter. It's very, very complicated. But they've given us access to internal documents. And again, they've set up these meetings. And I think that's very, very encouraging sign. And we've gotten a lot from those kinds of conversations, and we intend to keep them in the loop and even as partners going forward, so that if we do go to them later with a funding proposal, which we have every intention of doing, that we have a very good chance at getting the money we would need to sustain and even to grow the facility that we'll be opening.
Okay. I got another question from Ugly Joe. I'm sure you're not Ugly Joe. I'm sure. Justin, are you thinking of getting some support from suicide prevention? Some statistics on the effects of the shelter on suicide reduction might be helpful.
Well, yes, for sure. And I don't know if that individual is referring to a particular suicide prevention organization or just in general, sort of connecting the dots between abuse and trauma, and then that most tragic outcome, which is suicide. We just talked about Earl, as one example, but unfortunately there are others. So yeah, we do talk a lot about how trauma intersects with mental health and suicide, and that conference, Healing Journeys, that I've referred to a couple of times, that was the theme of that conference. It's the intersection of men, trauma, and mental health. We do that a lot. Not only that conference, but ongoing public events. The services that we run at the center in Toronto and now in Ottawa also talk a lot about the larger picture in terms of men's mental health and well-being, not only their physical health, which a number of groups, do some good work on, in particular the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. I want to give them credit, but also trying to broaden the conversation, because men's health isn't just physical health. It's also emotional and mental health and well-being more generally. So we're in that business. We're looking at men, their health and their well-being as general a way as we possibly can.
Okay. That's great. I was just thinking about, suicide help. I know that you probably already have, in Canada, you already have hotlines and things like that. But an intersection of those things is certainly important. And by the way, we were, in mentioning Earl Silverman, I also thought Erin Pitsey as well, because she talked about, after opening her first women's shelter, she learned that it was the whole conversation around domestic violence and broken families and the cycle of violence and abuse it's not unique to women, and she wanted to start a conversation about men in that. So in a way, Erin Pitsey was also a part of that discussion. And someone in the chat here asks, can you please name the shelter after Earl Silverman? I don't know if you guys were planning on doing anything like that, but I thought I would ask the question since he put it up there, or at least maybe honor him with a room or something. I know we named one of our rooms in the Badger Cave after Earl Silverman. It's not much, but we wanted to get.
I think that's a very Yeah, that's a very kind recommendation, and it has come up in conversation here. And no decisions have been made. We don't know, where the shelter is going to be, let alone the final name for it. But I really like the idea of having his name there, whether it's the name of the shelter or a room at the shelter. I think that's a very good idea. So I can't guarantee anything right now, but I definitely, like
Sure.
where that person's going with that suggestion.
Do you guys have like a place in mind, like an area or a site in Toronto in mind to put the shelter? Have you looked into that yet?
We have a real estate agent that we're working with who has looked into some neighborhoods. Now, because we don't know when we're going to be done the fundraising, we certainly hope it's the end of the year, but we don't know for sure. It's kind of hard to start looking at particular locations, but neighborhoods, yes. And then also talking to a number of city councilors in different communities, because we want to have a friend in City Hall. We know we've got some enemies in City Hall, but we'd like to have just a couple of them. But we'd like to have some friends in City Hall, and we're working on that. But it's really important that wherever we set up, we've got local city councilor who's supportive, but also that we're close to other agencies that can provide referral services. The location is very important, of course. So yes, we're looking at it. We're looking into that, but no particular candidate venues have been identified yet.
Okay. Let me just see if there's any other comments or questions here. I have one. Looks like there's nothing right now, but I'll check back. But how about this? All right, let's create a hypothetical scenario. Everything works out. You get the funding, you open the shelter, it's great. So it's great. It's the best shelter I've ever seen. It's the best. You guys have to see this. Believe me. After that's done, what's your next goal? Are you already looking at the next thing that you want to do? Like, do you have any really ambitious aspirations? Because I'm very excited for this. I'd like to see this go through and create a domino effect. But what are you looking to do after this? Like once this project is over?
Well, it does seem overly ambitious to be talking about the next project right now. But having said that, it was in the tail end of the campaign to open the Ottawa Centre that donors who had supported that came to me and said, "What can we do next? We really want to keep supporting you guys." And that's what led to that fateful meeting back in the summer where these philanthropists gave us the funds we needed to get started. So it's not too soon, I guess, to be talking about the next thing. There are some things we are working on, and they are exciting. They're not new concepts, but they're new geographies. So we really want to see more centers for men and families in different parts of the country. We've got some very dynamic branches out west, in particular in Vancouver and in Calgary and in Edmonton. And we are doing some fundraising right now in those locations to lay the foundation for an eventual national fundraising campaign, in particular in Calgary and Vancouver. So anybody listening who wants to earmark a contribution to a particular branch, you can do that, and you can still get a charity receipt.
Oh, wow.
I'd love for you to give to any of the projects we're working on, but you can make your own decision. The other thing I'd like to do, and we do a lot of service work. But we also do public education and policy work. We do want to improve public policies and make them more inclusive of men, boys, and families, their perspective and their issues. And there's an interesting way in which the more we do work around social services, the more authority and credibility we get in the community. And that will translate, already is translating, into becoming a voice around public policy debates. So we do want to make use of that Ottawa office that we now have, and we're laying the foundation there too for a national advocacy center in Canada's capital. So all of this stuff is brewing. More of that will come in 2018. Once we finish this national campaign around fundraising for the men's shelters. You want to see us get to some of that? Help us finish this project, and then I promise that we'll move on to some other exciting things.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I'd like to see that sites all over the country, and then maybe we could start doing that down here too. So Power Player 1000 says, on that point of taking in girls in your shelter, or at least not excluding them, which is the difference, he says that may be a very good selling point by keeping together families as compared to women's shelters that typically don't. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we came to that conclusion, not necessarily to sell people on the concept, but because we think that it will help the family to heal by staying together. And again, because there are so few places where single fathers are welcome, frankly, with their children. So we want this to be a safe place for a father, regardless of the kind of family dynamic that the father is dealing with. But I think that's a fair point. Certainly, I think community agencies and even potential funding agencies, I think will like the fact that we're as inclusive as we possibly can be, right?
Yeah, and it's very good to keep families together, and maybe even whether it's daughters or sons, right? Because they both need their parents involved, if at all possible, on any level that you can get them. I mean, that is very important. So I'm really glad absolutely. That you guys are keeping that in mind, and I do think that it's a good selling point. Obviously, it might, if people have to choose between a shelter that will separate or break the family up and one that will do its best not to, I think people will probably go for the latter. Okay, well, do you have anything that you wanted to say that maybe I didn't ask or address? Something about
no, I think I would just kind of emphasize again the urgency of all of this, and the fact that the more money we raise, the more we can do, and especially the more families we can support. Because what we're doing right now, we're not getting government support. It's not that we haven't tried. We, like many other men's charities, have gone to government, and they will just not provide seed funding. We're not going to get this open without private capital. And a lot of people, I think they want to see this open, but they kind of expect government to do it. I wish that were the case, but it's not going to happen. And so we can keep wishing, or we can make this happen ourselves. But we're doing the next best thing. We are involving government at every step of the way. We're going to prove to them that this place is making a difference in the lives of men and children. And we're going to show them that if they don't step up and become partners, that this place may not be sustainable, and it certainly won't grow. I think that's going to shift the burden back to them. The burden's on all of us right now to get this place open and to show that it actually is making a difference and that men will use it. But then if the government doesn't step up, then the burden shifts to them. And I think that they can be really held accountable to make sure that this project is sustainable and that it grows. So this is the strategy that we're using. And understand that the government so far has been at least willing to provide resources and to provide know-how and to open a number of important doors. And that's more than I think anybody's gotten. So we're very proud of that. But we need this project to be a success. And the more funds we get, the more services we can provide, the more, for example, legal services we can add on, so that men don't only have a safe place to go if they're dealing with abuse, they can also make sure that they have a good lawyer, that they can fight for their kids. So that when that family breaks up, at least the children continue to have a relationship with their dads. That's a big part of this too. We won't be able to do much on that front if we don't meet and even potentially exceed the fundraising campaign. And remember, we have that donor matching opportunity. This is an incredibly great chance to have your contributions doubled if you give before the end of the year. So please, let's take advantage of that. Yes. And let's just open this door. I mean, literally and metaphorically, because I think if we get this thing off the ground, it really will prove to be not just in Canada, but in the United States and in other countries as well. And we will see some fundamental changes in terms of not just the services for men and families, but the way we talk about victimization and domestic abuse. We can help change the whole conversation in this area if we get this space. If we get the space off the ground. We can do that as soon as 2018 if this GoFundMe campaign is successful. So go to gofundme.com/abused men shelter right now, please.
Yes. I displayed it back on the screen. Again, it's in the low bar. It looks like people made some donations while we were doing this very show. You're actually at 26,070 now. Yeah. So
yeah, we've crossed over the $26,000 mark, and that's fabulous. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we're already making some progress, and all we had to do is talk for 45 minutes. So I want to leave you guys with that. Please consider donating. If this is precedent-setting stuff. If we can get this off the ground, then it can only grow from there, and we could see shelters not only potentially in other parts of Canada that really need them, but other countries may take notice. I know that if it, once that takes off, I know that there are people here in the States that are watching this closely to see how well it does, and they're going to try and start the same initiatives here. So I would like to thank you, Justin, for taking the time to come on the show. And I would like to thank,
my pleasure.
Yeah, and Mind for hosting. And I want to thank you guys watching for coming and watching us. This has been the Fireside Chat. And please, like, favorite, subscribe if you haven't already. Subscribe to us on Twitch, as well as the Badger live streams channel and the original Honey Badger channel. And also go ahead and subscribe to the CAFE YouTube channel. It is Canadian Association for Equality. That should be is that the YouTube channel that you were talking about with the testimonies?
Yeah, it's YouTube.com/Equality Canada TV.
Yeah, Equality Canada TV. That's right. Yeah, but you can also search for Canadian Association for it comes up. So yeah, I would definitely
thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And we will talk to you guys next time. Have a lovely